Hi everybody. So another sofa session, and I've had to put the lights on because it has gone so dark so suddenly. June thunderstorms and all that. But anyhow, what this is about is understanding why other people often don't respond the way you expect them to respond, or don't respond predictably to you. And this is because of what people do when they feel they're in conflict, either with themselves or with someone else. Now, if you think about it, have you ever had someone just say one sentence to you and you felt an instant tension in your body? An instant kind of blockage or resistance in your mind? That's already level one conflict. So, for example, the classic example is when someone says, "Oh, your hair looks nice today." And sometimes you go, "But didn't it look nice yesterday? What's different about it? Haven't done anything with it." Now, that's a fairly simple example. But it might be if someone says, "Oh, finally, you've got that piece of work done." And it's like, what? What do you mean, finally? The deadline was today. You're already in conflict. And so a couple of things to understand about conflict, which will help us interact with other people in a more predictable and effective way, and also manage ourselves a bit better. So something to realize is that if you imagine life as driving along in a car on a flat level road, you can imagine the first level of conflict as being like the gradient getting slightly steeper. So what it means is just a little bit harder to function, just a little bit more effort is needed to kind of keep yourself on an even keel, to watch what you say, to not be sarcastic, to manage your own emotions, if you like. Yeah? And then if the conflict continues, it goes up and it gets steeper. That's what we can call stage 2 conflict. A little bit harder to deal with, takes more effort and more energy because you've got further to come back down, but it takes more energy to cope. And then level 3 is just you're driving off the top of the cliff. Okay, you really don't want to get to level 3. Level 3 for most of us is when we feel our life is threatened, our identity is threatened, and we either go all guns blazing to sort it out, or we just walk away and cut people off. So level 3 we don't tend to see much in adults, except in family situations where that can be triggered. But let's look at that level 1 and 2 conflict. So I can give you an example. I was in a meeting once. I was in a meeting and I was there specifically to present an idea which I had spoken one-on-one to everybody in the room about. So I presented the idea, and the point was what we were going to do at that meeting was decide whether we were going to act on it or not. So I shared the information, did the presentation. I'd done all the pre-work. I basically thought this was a kind of a paper exercise, that this was just rubber stamping. Okay, so we did the meeting, and when we got to the end, one of the senior people who I had spoken to privately said in front of everybody, "Well, I don't really understand why we're doing this, why this is necessary, and why I haven't been consulted." Now, can you imagine what my reaction was? Definitely level 1 conflict, but maybe even level 2. Now, my reaction actually was I was confused, I was angry, I wanted to attack him, and it took a lot of effort to manage myself in that situation. I was very lucky. Someone else in the room said, "Oh, come on, Peter. Kathy's talked to all of us about this. There's no surprises here. It's exactly what we've been talking about for the last 2 weeks." And luckily someone else spoke. So I was able to get control of myself back and carry on and be on an even keel and go back down to my level road again. But in that instant, if that person hadn't come in and I'd been there, I don't think I would have been responding very professionally. And why is that? Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, as soon as we go into conflict, as soon as we get that feeling of there's a problem here or there's a threat here, what happens is our limbic system, which is the most primitive part of our brain, goes, there's a threat, and it starts taking all the brain resources to focus on dealing with the threat and keeping us safe. Now, by doing that, it takes resources away from the prefrontal cortex, which is where our rational mind is and our logical mind, and the one that can go navigate the political currents in a meeting. So actually, the minute we go into that level 1 conflict, and even worse in level 2, our brain cannot process the way it needs to manage the situation. So we've got to have strategies for coming out of conflict. Now, we work on this in the Confident Leader Journey. That's one of the core things we look at in terms of working on ourselves. But what I'd like to posit to you is everybody else is going through the same thing. So if you're in a meeting and you say something and someone takes it the wrong way, they seem to be getting aggressive and they seem to be getting defensive, or they want to withdraw, which are the typical responses to feeling in conflict, what can you do to turn off their limbic system threat, get their prefrontal cortex engaged and get back to a normal conversation? You have to make them feel safe and take the threat away. How do you do that? Reframe the situation, own some of the stuff yourself, make it absolutely clear that this wasn't a challenge, it wasn't a power grab, it was purely a question you were asking, or maybe even relate to the person. So for example, let's imagine I was Peter, and let's imagine that I'd forgotten about the conversation I'd had with Kathy about this topic, and I hadn't read my recent emails about it. So I was taken a bit by surprise and I was in conflict, and I came out with this, I haven't seen this, I haven't been consulted. Okay. For me to handle that, the best thing would have been to say along the lines of, do you know what, I'm terribly sorry if the information hasn't reached you in a meaningful fashion. I'm happy to talk to you one-on-one on this offline. Totally understand that you're feeling a little bit put out if you weren't aware of this. Nobody likes being surprised. And all of that would have brought him back down to the level instead of his stage of conflict. Okay. Now, some of you might say, well, why would you apologize? It wasn't your fault. Because that's not the point. What I was apologizing for was not for not communicating with him. I knew I'd done that. I was apologizing for creating a situation where he felt in conflict. Does that make sense? I was empathetic about his feelings. It wasn't nice for him to be feeling that way. And although some of that was his responsibility, if my objective was to move things forward, bring him back out of conflict so we could have a rational conversation, then we could do it. Now, my colleague stepping in and saying, we've all seen this, we've all had those conversations, and reminding him by a third party coming in and doing that, he was also able to go, oh, right, okay, and let the threat level go down. So when people act unpredictably, ask yourself first, are they acting in a way that shows they're feeling threatened? In other words, has their conscious, rational brain stopped working? Are they acting more emotionally? So either coming out fighting or withdrawing and running away. Those are the two, fight or flight. Or are they just frozen there and not able to process stuff? In which case, if you notice that, the first thing you can do is remove the threat and calm everything down. And if you do that, I guarantee you, you're going to have better interactions with your colleagues, better interactions with your friends and family. And more importantly, you're going to be owning it. It's going to be you doing this. Okay? So understanding your own reaction to conflict helps you understand other people's reaction to conflict, and knowing that fundamentally stages 1 and 2 of conflict are just feeling threatened, which kicks your limbic system in. And if we want to get that conscious brain working again, we need to remove that threat so those resources go back to the prefrontal cortex, which is where our conscious mind is in operation. Knowing the neuroscience makes a difference. So knowing ourselves helps us own ourselves, choose what we do, and have more control over our lives. Okay, Kathy Syrett from the Confident Leader Journey, where we cover this in more detail on our 12-month program. Okay, do the taster program, and we'll touch on it there as well, so you'll get a deeper understanding of it. Take care.